You see all types of roster predictions every time a new Super Smash Bros. Game comes around. Everyone's vying for that chance to be the one who got it right, and the talk surrounding them borders on the infinite. The mock-up rosters you see run the gamut from the safe and predictable to the more out there to the crazy or sometimes uninformed. We've all seen examples. In part 1 of this two-parter, we took a deep dive into the guidelines behind the Smash developers' creative process and the guidelines they seem to follow, then used that to make a quote-quote safe prediction, with realistic decisions and only a few risks taken, of what may be the starting roster for the upcoming Smash on the Switch. But for this part, we're going to go in a different direction, a wilder one. Best brace yourselves, because the wild roster is going to make some of you as angry as you will be when you find out the real thing. Quick disclaimer, everything from here on out is going to be running off the assumption that you've already watched part 1, and remember the key points for speculation and the characters discussed therein. If you haven't seen it yet, I strongly recommend pausing now and watching part 1, or you'll risk getting lost and confused about stuff that won't make any sense. Here's your last chance to go do that now. Okay, let's begin. Before we discuss each character individually, let's go over the roster itself and explain the ideas behind it. Hey, this may be the wild roster, but there's a method to the madness. Whereas the safe roster in part 1 was built off the idea that Smash Switch is an iterative sequel that builds on top of Smash 4's engine and assets, and that does seem to be what's going on from our limited scope at the moment, this roster answers a different question. What if Smash Switch is completely new? What if it was always planned to be its own thing, fully untethered from Smash 4 from the very beginning? And that brings us to our first bold prediction. With the new game comes a chance to refresh the roster and shake the rust off. Showing some restraint for the base release would make for something more manageable, the way it happens in other fighting game franchises. And while Sakurai personally dislikes actively cutting characters, we've seen several times now that sometimes things just happen and characters end up being out-prioritized. This radical departure from the series so far would give us a starting cast of just a little over 40. And it says something that I couldn't get it down any further without feeling like I was pushing the envelope too far. Bear in mind, a smaller base roster doesn't necessarily mean a reboot. I've seen some speculators suggest Smash Switch might hit the reset button and start over, and I ain't buying it. Especially considering a reduced base roster would go hand in hand with something else instead. Nintendo's gained a newfound interest in what they call a games-as-service model, providing constant updates after a game's release that add new content over time. We've seen them use this model to great success with Splatoon, ARMS, Xenoblade 2, and Super Mario Odyssey. And it honestly isn't that wild an idea that they'd apply it to Smash as well. We know Sakurai likes to cram as much content into the base release as possible, but this model wouldn't require content to be cut to roll out later. They just keep on creating more after the game's out. In fact, maybe the reason we're getting it this year instead of next is because they're planning on doing rolling updates to keep introducing more characters, stages, and maybe even modes over time. For example, I could see free updates to this roster reintroducing characters like Wario, Toon Link, Meta Knight, Rob, and Corrin. You see, none of these unknown newcomers you see here are replacing anyone. Truth is, it's never actually happened before. Toon Link was more of a spiritual successor to Young Link, and the talk of Lucario replacing Mewtwo was completely off base because the latter was planned for Brawl and missed out due to time constraints. But I digress, you get the idea. So in this scenario, we may be seeing a lot of characters come back eventually, but not all veterans would be handled equally. You see, some could look a little different upon making their grand return. Some extra time in the workshop would offer a chance to give more of the old guard a retool. There are a handful of characters that have had people clamoring for a revamp because of how dated they feel, and this would allow for a better means to make that happen. For example, it could be time for Ganondorf to shed his semi-clone moveset for something more distinct. Perhaps an original design based on what he'd have looked like in Breath of the Wild had he been able to fully revive. Or for other examples, maybe Palutena could have her specials reworked to be less reliant on having access to customization. Or maybe Jigglypuff could actually get a few fairy type or a few more sound-based moves worked into her moveset. Or perhaps their best means of bringing a certain Umbra Witch back down to Earth in a reasonable way. This would go hand in hand with just the right amount of new characters to create a compelling release day roster that only get more interesting over time. As for who these unknowns are, well, if you did see part 1 first like I recommended, hint hint, then, well, you know 3 of them already. I expect you might have some questions like, wait, only the Ice Climbers come back? Where's Snake? Where's Wolf? The hell, where's Lucas, Mewtwo, Roy? Why would they show the DLC veterans the door just after bringing them back? Well, when it comes down to it, the Smash team has a history of favoring newcomers on the bubble over veterans. We know that Bowser Jr. was the last one into the base release of Smash 4, yet he was still considered high priority enough to get in. Consider that for a moment. Several veterans, including Mewtwo, weren't quite high enough priority themselves to make the cut, yet this newcomer was. When push comes to shove, Sakurai and crew have shown they'd rather have a fresh new face than an older familiar one. And with a roster this tough to get into, I think most borderline picks for the base roster will end up being newcomers. But then rolling updates could bring some of those missing veterans back eventually. And that leaves us with one more question that might also be on your minds. Wait, where's Decidueye? What's the character that basically everyone has pegged to get in not doing here? So remember, in this scenario, the Smash team has been planning with the knowledge that they'll be updating the game long after it's on shelves. Probably all the way through the end of next year when Pokemon's 8th generation has come out. Due to that, I could see them doing something more pragmatic, choosing the Mon with a rarer elemental niche to put in the base roster. After all, we know there'll be other options for grass types and their plant-based powers every generation just since there's always a grass starter. But who knows when they'll get a chance to add another prominent rock type or any character with earth-based powers who isn't completely reliant on the Smash ballot. If you remember, this same now or never situation was exactly how Corrin and their unique shapeshifting powers got the all clear during Smash 4 DLC despite Sakurai's hesitations. Sure, it's a risky call, but this is the wild roster, and when we've seen something similar happen before, it's an outcome we really should be considering. And so, our groundwork is laid. Veterans in one return are accounted for, those missing so far have been acknowledged, and now we turn to the wild roster's waiting newcomers. The first, a newfound fan favorite among her series faithful, but one whose presence in Smash would stoke the fury of those who see her unworthy. But no matter, she's used to having enemies who want her dead. Fire Emblem has grown tremendously in recent years, and just so happens to have a massive cast of playable characters, one of several complicated reasons behind the surprise jump in representation in Smash 4. With Shadows of Valentia in the works at the time Smash Switch's roster was likely picked out, there had been an opportunity for the remake's two protagonists, and Celica has an argument for being a compelling choice through a combination of swordplay and magic that takes a different flavor from that of Robin. While yet another Fire Emblem newcomer would be a stretch for a safer roster, this one has Roy, Lucina, and Corrin absent from the base release, lessening that problem and leaving the door open just far enough for Celica to join. The key to her playstyle would be her nature as a hybrid character, using both magic spells and her signature sword, the beloved Zofia. Valentian magic is distinct from that of all other Fire Emblem games in that it is not cast using spellbooks but is instead powered by the wielder's own life force, costing some of their HP with each use. This would be worked into Smash by having Celica's specials and any A attacks that use magic deal recoil damage, functioning like a properly balanced version of Pichu's gimmick and adding an element of risk versus reward to her playstyle. Knowing when to let loose with spells like Fire or Seraphim and when to wait and not harm yourself carelessly would be key. If Sakurai and crew wanted to take some creative liberties, they could even have Celica borrow from the spell lists of her allies the way Ness and Lucas borrow some moves from theirs. This would give her access to magic like Rewarp as a recovery move, or Invoke to summon an illusory soldier to stand guard in a spot and attack opponents who get too close. Next, we turn once more to Xenoblade, another rising star in Nintendo's library. Rex and Pyro were a pretty safe guess for the safe roster, but what if the dev team was thinking ahead knowing they'd be doing rolling updates after release? They might have realized the pair would still be a strong option later on as DLC, and instead chose to turn their attention to someone else, someone whose chances for Smash were much more urgent. No one said survival was easy, and Elma knows that full well, fighting to keep humanity alive on a hostile alien world after Earth's destruction. Xenoblade Chronicles X brought a stark departure in style compared to its counterparts, and while its reception is more mixed, it's still compelling nonetheless. Perhaps Sakurai saw something in this soldier of the future. We do know he purchased this particular figure a while back to use its weapon as visual aid for some unknown purpose, and it does bear a striking resemblance to the Skell mechs used in X and the weapons they're armed with. But of course, Elma can stand on her own as well. Employing the roguelike Full Metal Jaguar fighting style, she relies on constant movement and flanking her opponents to always have the upper hand. Elma fights with dual daggers and dual beam pistols and switches between them as needed, and so each of her attacks in Smash would use one or the other, giving Elma a mix of ranged chip damage and close-up strikes. Her vast array of combat arts, such as Shadow Strike and Ghost Factory, give her moveset potential as high as other Xenoblade characters. And she even comes with 2 viable options for a final Smash. Would she push her body beyond its physical limits with Overdrive, or hop aboard her personal Skell and open fire on her enemies? Now, let's change gears a little. I admit the roster you saw earlier wasn't entirely truthful. You see, I think we could see a newcomer that doesn't take up a new spot. Many speculators have assumed the Miis will get cut, but what if the opposite happens, and we get a new Mii fighter? Nintendo's personal avatars may be optional nowadays, but they still have their uses and have a niche in Smash as the creative character of sorts. Honestly, a Magic user is pretty predictable in that regard. Basically the first thing everyone thinks of regarding new Mii types if they entertain the idea. And hey, who didn't pretend to be an all-powerful sorcerer at some point when they were kids? The Mii spellcaster would dress in a purple tunic as the default, and carry a magic wand in a battle as their weapon, though most attacks would involve using it to cast spells and not just beat people over the head with it. Costumes could range from various styles of robes and wizard hats, to a stage magician's formal wear, to a copy of Zelda's dress or Medusa's robes, to a black mage outfit, to more obscure ideas like costumes of Merrick and Lind. As far as playstyle goes, the spellcaster would have a focus on stage control and setups, to differentiate from the Mii gunner's more straightforward projectile zoning. And they do so with attacks that run the gamut from every school of magic imaginable. They could even group the specials around 3 themes. The first set for classic elemental magic like fireballs and lightning bolts, the second around bending reality with spells for creating portals or warping gravity, and the third set could go in a crazier direction and use classic magic tricks. Imagine stacking and then throwing a hand of magic playing cards, or taking a top hat out of hammer space, pulling a rabbit out of it, and letting it run back and forth across the stage. We have one more first-party newcomer to cover. You may have heard some rumors making the rounds, and while I'm just as in the dark about things as all of you are, I think there might be something to them. Because it may finally be time for a certain someone to make his big debut. What's left to say about Ridley at this point? His reputation precedes himself. Among the most requested newcomers for a good 10 years now, yet relegated to 2 boss fights in Brawl and a stage boss in Smash 4. There's a lot of bad blood and a lot of people who hold a grudge against Sakurai for quote-quote rejecting Ridley so far. But Sakurai doesn't actually seem to hate the big guy. In fact, he seems to care quite a bit, based on word that the reason Ridley was turned down twice was due to the Smash devs struggling to find a way to get his size and flight to work in a way that felt true to character. And that's the key. What if they finally figured out a character concept that works in Smash's environment? The Villager, Miis, and Pac-Man all got rejected during Brawl's development, yet made it into Smash 4. And now, it just might be Ridley's chance this time. And for what it's worth, he is relevant right now thanks to his appearance in Samus Returns. As you'd expect, Ridley would have a big presence in battle, but reasonably so. The largest character in the game, but still sized down to be only about 20% bigger than Bowser or so. That sheer size would lend toward a playstyle that clicks with Ridley's personality and deceptively sharp mind, fighting patiently in neutral to work his way in on his opponents while carefully avoiding stray hits with his huge frame. But once he's in on them, he'd be capable of a furious amount of pressure beyond that of anyone else on the roster, laying waste with claws, tail swipes, fireballs, brutal command grabs, and the full extent of the abilities he's shown in his long history of boss fights. That's the first parties out of the way, but who in the world could our 2 guest newcomers be? Yes, I said 2. Third parties took a turn for the unpredictable during Smash 4 DLC, showing us that Sakurai is casting a wide net and keeping his options open. Though for our first guest fighter, there's a chance he may go back to someone who's been on his radar for a while now. You know, for a one-off character from a 20-year-old game, it's actually really impressive that Geno's maintained such a cult following. As essentially the Mushroom Kingdom equivalent of an angel possessing an action figure. No, seriously! He aids Mario and crew on their quest to drive back an extra-dimensional army of living weapons, and people have been hoping for his return ever since. So far to no avail, aside from that 1 cameo. Which is why it was such a shock when we learned that Sakurai considered him for Brawl. And then we got a Mii costume of him during Smash 4 DLC. While it would have been a hard sell having Geno be the first Square Enix character in Smash over someone from Final Fantasy, being their second character is actually kinda plausible. And since he may have had some significant Smash Ballad support, as well as Sakurai's knack for playing the hype man and giving a chance to more obscure characters that he thinks more people would like if they got to know them, like he did with Ness, Captain Falcon, and Pit, the stars may just align in Geno's favor. Despite having a single game to his name, Geno actually has a lot of moveset potential. All of his weapons in Super Mario RPG allow him to use a child's toy he inhabits to fire a multitude of different projectiles, ranging from simple bullets and rocket fists all the way up to laser beams and his special attacks. And for the final touch, his moveset could be built around using the action commands that Mario RPGs have become famous for, allowing him to deal extra damage or add new effects to his attacks by performing extra inputs at just the right time. We've just one newcomer left now. With every Smash roster comes some amount of backlash from people who don't like some of its choices, and this particular character would see a lot of it. I've even seen some people resent or even dread the idea of him getting in. And yet, there's an argument for inclusion and even some merit to it happening. Get your pitchforks at the ready, because the Wild roster's final newcomer is... So, Minecraft is kind of a big deal. A very big deal. It's practically on the level of Mario for a lot of younger gamers. There's something to be said for jumping into an open environment and letting your creativity run wild. Minecraft has had a presence on the Wii U, new 3DS, and now the Switch, and it's done very well on Nintendo platforms. It seems Microsoft has become less hostile in the grand scheme of things and more willing to collaborate with former rivals, to where this more or less face of Minecraft actually feels possible. Maybe not probable, admittedly, but hey, this is the Wild roster. So, thing is, there's a lot of bad blood towards Steve and Minecraft in general among the Smash community for being a newer gaming icon. The fact that this series is so known for being popular with kids has created this us versus them dynamic in the minds of us grown-up gamers that rears its ugly head anytime one of them dares to set foot anywhere near our Smash Brothers. But Smash isn't some members-only club, and Sakurai doesn't view it as such, and really, neither should we. Longshot candidate or not, if Steve does get in, can we not get all hostile about it? On the bright side, there's actually a lot to work with here for a character concept. Odds are, Steve would be deliberately built to have a simplistic moveset and a gentle learning curve, to be easy to learn and appealing to the newer players who are most likely to be interested in maining him, just like the simpler movesets of Mario, Kirby, Yoshi, or etc. His alternate skins could range from simple palette swaps to various costumes and armor sets to more outlandish stuff like, well, the sky's the limit with a series like this. The normally rigid animations of a Minecraft avatar would probably get touched up to look better in Smash's environment while still being recognizable. Think something kinda like what Minecraft Story Mode did. And if you want to talk moveset potential, oh boy, there are a lot of different ways a moveset could go, with all the weapons, tools, objects, enemies, blocks, potions, and countless other creations available at your fingertips while playing. Hey, maybe one of Steve's specials could have him plunk down an actual crafting table and build a weapon or contraption to use right on the spot. And there you have it, the second of two comprehensive takes on what Smash Switch's base roster may look like. If you have any unanswered questions regarding characters who didn't show up, I answered many of them at the end of part 1, so hopefully you have watched that by now. But there were a handful of characters I considered that didn't make either roster, yet who I think are still notable, and I want to touch on those honorable mentions right now. Paper Mario is right up there next to Captain Toad among Marioverse frontrunners, I think. He has a ton of moveset potential if you pull from all of his games and not just those you prefer, and because of that, he'd make more sense as his own thing than a clone of the regular Mario. But a major element of the Smash roster is timing, not just when development starts, but what will release between then and a ways before development ends. And since Super Mario Odyssey was a big marquee title that Sakurai and crew would absolutely have known about, and Captain Toad has a recurring role in it, I think he'd be higher priority right now and Paper Mario would end up overshadowed. Dixie Kong is another notable one, especially with Tropical Freeze getting an enhanced port on the Switch. With her prehensile ponytail, she has enough unique abilities to also not be a clone. And I don't think King K. Rool affects her chances at all since he'd probably be a ballot pick and Dixie doesn't need the ballot. However, the other characters on the rosters just ended up beating her out. and we don't even know if a simple touched-up re-release of a game does qualify as relevance in the Smash team's eyes. I also gave Animal Crossing's Isabelle a look for a little while. She's a fan favorite, and her shtick as your loyal assistant in New Leaf and the way she's hung around ever since has me think she'd top the list for a second Animal Crossing character, and the series is definitely big enough now to justify such a thing. But then I tried to figure out how she could fight, and I couldn't really come up with anything that really felt like a must-add. I could maybe see something based around building various structures and a heavy bend on team support, but as is, I gotta wonder if the villager covers the core of Animal Crossing so well that any further newcomers would be a tough sell. I've seen a lot of Pokemon characters get support, and I did consider several other current standouts beyond Decidueye and Lycanroc. Gen 7 in particular has a lot of good choices. That said, there was always something with the others that made me hesitate, like Incineroar being yet another big bruiser with fire powers when we know Sakurai looked for stuff we haven't seen before, and Mimikyu leaning really hard on the popularity argument when that's never really been the deciding factor toward a character getting in, especially since the roster was probably picked out a little while before Sun and Moon were even released. Any of these could still make it, I suppose, but they all have potential hang-ups that limit their chances in ways that the two I went with don't have to worry about as much. I also looked at other possible Smash ballot picks. Again, each have their own merits, and with how limited our idea is of who nominated who on a large scale, a lot of things could happen. We don't yet know how or even if the ballot will be used in Smash Switch for absolute sure yet, much less who the devs might have their eyes on. So while I stuck to Karul for the safe roster and Geno for the wild roster, I'm keeping my options open, and I recommend you do the same. Third parties were another complicated process, and I imagine the total lack of anything Konami left many of you scratching your heads or possibly foaming at the mouth. I know people want Snake back, I know Bomberman rose from his grave last year, and I know Simon Belmont and Castlevania have a storied history. But it's the company they're tied to that has me hesitating. Konami's gained a reputation of the worst kind in recent years, and while a lot of speculators point to Bomberman R as proof Nintendo is willing to dismiss that, I'm not so sure Sakurai would, not after he saw firsthand how they treated his longtime friend Hideo Kojima. When there are so many other options for guest fighters, I'm not sure he'd feel the need to get his hands dirty. And of course, there are many other characters that I haven't mentioned. Smash speculation is nothing if not very unpredictable, so if you have any favorites that you've been seeing get written off, don't lose hope. So, what do you think? Gotta say, the response to the first part was above and beyond anything I'd ever expected. If you're a new supporter or subscriber, I'm honored to have a thumbs up from you. Now I gotta keep this up somehow. Special thanks goes to Voyager for his magic touch on the graphic design front. He just keeps outdoing himself and I don't know how he does it. Thanks as well to all of my patrons for sticking with me this far. Looks like it's starting to pay off, huh? If you feel personally compelled to support my content, becoming a patron will grant you access to special perks like design notes for these videos, a suggestion box for future projects you might want me to tackle, and even a glimpse into my plans for the coming weeks and details of my thought processes. With E3 inching ever closer and it only being a matter of time until the floodgates open, checking out my other Smash-themed content could make the wait a little more bearable. My signature series, Challenger Approaching, is about creating full-fledged character concepts for potential Smash newcomers. And keep checking back after E3 for more videos based on whatever we learn. And so, until then.